Hi, it's Christine Daigle.
It's Jenna Brown.
J. Kevin Tomlinson.
And JD Barker, welcome to Writers Inc. So I came home from Disney World and got a very cool email. So Rolling Stone asked me to be a contributing editor. I don't know if we've talked about this.
That's cool.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's starting. I wrote an article for them, and I think it's coming out like in the next week or two. I don't know the exact dates, but I'm going to do something that they don't seem very particular. I didn't get any deadlines. They're like, they don't care what topic I write about. They just want me to submit something 500 to 1,000 words. So I can do that.
No joke, man.
So we'll
That's awesome.
yeah, so we'll see where that
JD,
goes.
man. Yeah,
I get
all
the weirdest.
gigs I want.
I get the weirdest phone calls.
That's cool. Congratulations on that. That's cool.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Thanks. So what's going on with you guys? Anything exciting?
My son graduates next week with his PhD.
His PhD?
Yeah, he's getting a PhD in space lasers.
Space lasers.
I find that more relatable and understandable than you having a kid old enough to be graduating with a PhD. That one shocks me more. Because you look like you're like 15, so there's no way this is just proof that we live in the Matrix is all this is.
We do, yes. This is my digital avatar, actually. I have just created a holographic image of me frozen in time because I have a son who makes space lasers. So
that's the bumper sticker you want on your Volvo, by the way. My son makes space lasers. Very cool.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm sure it's a lot more technical than that, but that's, it's a lot more fun. I'm waiting for the day that he makes me a functional lightsaber, even though he tells me scientifically it's not possible. I just keep telling him it's not possible yet.
You just haven't found the right combination of technology.
I got in a lot of trouble because of the whole lightsaber thing.
Yeah.
Did we talk about this on the air? So my daughter, now she's 6. I got her into Star Wars. I told her the only place that she can get a legit lightsaber is at Disney World. They went to Disney World, but we didn't actually go to the Hollywood themed park. We went to the other ones, and that's where the Star Wars attraction is. And it's like the only place in the entire Disney World kingdom where you can actually get a lightsaber. So she did not get a lightsaber, and I'm still hearing about it.
JD.
Yeah, she saw a couple people. Well, the other thing was like they're the Force FX, I guess, lightsabers. Like they're more display items. They're not really meant for like actual combat or playtime. So, but like she wants to be able to beat like these two against each other the way she sees them on TV and in the movies and stuff. So yeah, I have to keep searching. There is a video out there though. If I vaguely recall, somebody from Disney, like an executive from Disney, walking out on a stage with like something that looked like a real lightsaber.
Yeah. That collapses.
Okay, so you know what I'm talking about, right? Yeah, but it's not plasma or anything like that, right? It's
not a real lightsaber, but it functions.
It just looks
like
real.
A lightsaber. It's very cool.
Yeah, it looked very cool. But yeah, so if anybody in the audience knows where I can get a real lightsaber for my 6-year-old,
well, I get invited to several different like Comic-Cons and things like that, and there's always a booth that sells like all types of different lightsabers, and they're quote combat ready. You can go and bash each other with them.
There you go.
So,
do you dress up like an Ewok? You look. I'm guessing that's your go-to costume.
I go all natural, and everyone just assumes I'm dressed as an Ewok because I'm only like 3 foot tall and very hairy. So,
on that note, let's what's in the news?
You started
it. Yeah, I know. I shouldn't go there.
All right, in the news. World's first book with no AI warranty set to transform global publishing industry. British author R.R. Haywood has introduced a, quote, no AI stamp on his book, The Undead, indicating it was authentically created by a human and not AI generated. The label also serves as a legally binding guarantee of authenticity to address concerns over the rise of AI-generated content in the publishing industry. Haywood advocates for this label to become a standard in the industry to prevent consumer deception and maintain trust in human-authored works. Haywood argues that failing to disclose AI involvement in book creation could lead to legal issues under laws like the UK's Misrepresentation Act, which outlaws false claims in product sales. He suggests that books partially or wholly created by AI should legally declare this fact to avoid misleading consumers. A solution looking for a problem. That's what this says.
Well, this is a weird thing, right? Because he created it and he put it on his own book. So either it's only going to appear on one book, or everybody's actually going to adopt it. And the other side, like, first of all, it's a brilliant idea, because we've all talked about it. None of us came up with an actual sticker or a logo. So
I should have done it.
Yeah, props to him. I'm wondering how far he took it though, because like he could trademark that and then license it back and basically get a paycheck every time somebody uses it if it becomes some kind of standard.
But then no one's going to use that. Like, why would anybody use it?
Right. Nobody's going to use it. Yeah. So
I don't think it's necessary. I think the idea is a good idea, and authors could put something like this on their own work. But I don't think that using AI and not disclosing it is the same thing as misrepresenting your work. You have to actually make statements and make proclamations to misrepresent something. You're not misrepresenting just by presenting something. So at least that's my understanding of the legal side.
So you're saying that you would have to say AI, but you in fact did use AI, and then that would be misrepresentation.
Right. That would be misrepresentation. If you had this stamp on your book and it turned out that you weren't thinking about it, but you used AI to generate like the copy for the back cover or something. Well, now you've run afoul of the law. So you're actually at more risk by putting the stamp on there, if that's your goal.
I think that didn't Amazon also do something where like you have to put something on? So it's already like YouTube had like all these places already have that, like you have to disclose if you've used AI in some way. So yeah, it's like you said, a solution looking for a problem.
Yeah, he's getting famous off of it.
Well, that makes me wonder, is Amazon going to just start doing this themselves? Because they force you to answer that question when you upload the book, which means they could create their own graphic and they could automatically slap it on whatever titles they want. I could see that happening, long before people are going to pick up whatever this guy created.
I do think that Amazon is cruising toward a time. I think they're preparing for a time when they'll have a separate AI section on the site. So
for their AI readers.
Because some people don't care.
Narrators.
Some people don't really care at all that it was written by AI. They just want a good story, and they're willing to. In those books, what will happen is the price will be driven down on those. So if you're doing this, I mean, and identifying it with Amazon, I'm not saying whether you should or shouldn't, but I think everyone's headed for a problem, frankly. But that's me. I'm not an attorney, so don't take any legal advice from me. Readers Take Denver cancels 2025 conference after attendees decry Fire Festival of Books. And I think that's pretty accurate. Attendees of the Readers Take Denver event described it as extremely chaotic and poorly organized, with issues like long lines, inadequate security, and mismanaged schedules. The conference's mismanagement led attendees and participants to compare it to the infamous Fire Festival, indicating a wide gap between expectations and reality. Promised features like a no-line environment were not delivered. Notable authors, including bestseller Rebecca Yarros, publicly criticized the event and announced their decision not to participate in future iterations. This sentiment was echoed by many attendees who expressed their disappointment on social media and other platforms. Due to the negative reception and the organizational failures of the 2024 event, the organizers have canceled the planned 2025 edition of Readers Take Denver. This decision reflects the significant challenges and backlash faced by the event organizers. This was a mess.
Yeah, this was a whole thing.
Yeah, this is the first I've heard of this. Was this their first conference, or
no?
Has this been going on year after year?
No.
I don't think so. No, I think that it was run and it was really popular, but they kept it small. And it appears perhaps that ugly monster greed took over, because I couldn't help but see this because it was everywhere. Yeah. And so allegedly authors were promised certain things like time and signing, and that there would only be a certain number of attendees. And then they sold more tickets than they told the authors. And then when authors were like, hey, how is this going to be a no-line environment, and how are we going to do this? And so then they gave readers, and I don't know how this was determined, but numbers.
Yeah.
And they only gave a certain amount of numbers. So a lot of people went thinking, I'm going to be able to go see my favorite author, and then they were told, oh, sorry, you didn't get the lottery, so you don't get to meet the author. And they didn't tell authors that they were doing this, and so then authors were getting the backlash from readers, and it apparently was just a terrible, terrible, terrible thing. They didn't have any security, so like at one point there was some military conference, and these drunk military guys came over and were like not behaving appropriately. It was a mess.
Yeah.
Wow.
Fire.
Everyone I know who attended this was on social media throughout, and then immediately after just completely trashing everything about this thing. So I'm kind of glad I didn't go. But then again, I wish I had, because I missed out.
I feel like I missed out too. Like,
But as an author, though, you don't want to, you don't want to be getting hate from your readers. It doesn't seem like
That's the problem. That's the real problem. Yeah. The people who took, well, the authors and everyone who participated, they had a crappy time, but the real issue was that this pissed off a bunch of readers, which was literally the whole point of the conference.
Right.
So
I do think that it was so obvious that it was the organizers at a certain point that the readers shifted anger at like, what's going on with this signing, to like, what's going on with this whole conference. So for authors anyway, I suppose that's the silver lining.
Yeah. I know that Rebecca actually, I think she was one of the ones who actually kind of went and set up her own little venue somewhere and told all those readers, come see me. And, now she can do that. She's got the funds to do that. There were a lot of authors who attended this who are, this was a big event for them because this was going to be a chance to meet readers and sell more books and, kind of expand their presence. And they did not get to do that. So ugly.
Yeah. It's not good.
Speaking of ugly, clone your own voice for audio production with 11 Labs. This is something I use, so I'm glad to see this story. Last week, we covered the partnership between HarperCollins and 11 Labs. Jane Friedman, who is the person who shared this with us through her Electric Speed newsletter, recommends cloning your own voice for audio production. For our listener, Sam, you sent in the original article. Sam let us know that with 11 Labs, you can dub your social media videos into different languages, such as Spanish, French, German, using your own voice. And this could be useful for indie authors looking to break into those markets. So thanks, Sam.
Yeah. I didn't really think about that. Yeah.
this is cool tech. Have you guys actually seen this working?
No.
Yeah.
Have you done it?
I use this.
Like the translations?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I set up my own voice. And the only thing I don't like is, well, I mean, it's not that I don't like it. There is some tweaking involved if you want it to sound natural or whatever. It sounds like me, but it sounds like a very somber me, a very flat, but it's great for, I don't know. It's not, I wouldn't use it to necessarily read copy, but the whole, like using it to translate to another language, like that's really very cool. I haven't tried that yet, but that's cool.
That is cool.
Did you use it for strictly audio or video?
I have used it for both, but for video, it just was the like narration under the video. But I do such a better job that I just stopped doing it. Like I don't see that as being a benefit to me for short stuff. But for like my whole reason for doing this was I wanted to start recording audiobooks in my voice. It's a long, challenging process to make it happen, and it's almost easier for me to just read it myself. But it is a pretty good way to go, but I don't think I would ever use it for my fiction. I think I would only ever use this for nonfiction because it just doesn't have inflection and stuff yet, or at least nothing I can depend on. It'll sometimes randomly inflect, and put like a question mark in the middle of a sentence or something. Like it can go really wild. You can get really crazy with it. There's little levers you can move that make it do stuff.
I'm curious about how you get protection from cloning your voice. Does anyone know specifics of that? I know you can use it for free for a little while. And then how does cloning your voice protect you?
Well, I mean, there's a...
Well, do you still own it?
Yeah, you still own it. And you can basically kind of license it back to 11 Labs to sell for others to use, but you don't have to do that. You can you can just keep your own cloned voice to yourself. Now, you can't really prevent it's against the rules to do this, but you can't really prevent someone from like grabbing audio samples of your voice and cloning your voice. Most people aren't going to have that problem. Someone did that with Jordan Peterson, and had him say some really funny stuff that, at first he was okay with, and then they started using it for highly political stuff, and he, I think he filed a suit against them or something. Cool. But the thing is, I see people doing this. They haven't been busted on this yet, but like a lot of people on YouTube who do like comic book stuff, particularly Batman, they take the voice of Kevin Conroy, who used to voice Batman on the animated series, and they've cloned his voice to do all that stuff. And it sounds amazing and you love hearing it, but that's so illegal. Like I don't know. There's something that's bad. So they haven't been busted yet, but I look for that to happen anytime now. Next up, and this is our last news story of the day, some guy named JD Barker continues to support the prison book program with a 500 book donation. I don't know if you guys have heard about this one, but no files have been included inside the books, but JD has donated thousands of books to the program since early in his career. Most prisons don't allow friends or family to provide books. That's a quote straight from JD. And prison libraries depend on organizations like the Prison Book Program for quality reading material. The program is an approved book vendor at over 1,000 prisons and jails in all 50 states, Guam, and Puerto Rico. And you can find details about that at prisonbookprogram.org.
Yeah, so I wanted to bring this up because I do it with every one of my titles. I always send them. This is the first time I've done 500. I've done smaller amounts, but authors in general, you can do this too. Like you can send one book, you can send 5, you can send as many as you want. They can only take paperbacks. For some reason, they can't take hardcovers. You have to keep that in mind. And if you don't want to send your own books, if you go to their website, they've got wish lists from each of the prisons. So prisoners will have particular books that they want. So you can buy those too. I just thought it's a cool way to kind of give back, and get your books out there. You've also got a captive audience, no pun intended.
Yeah, I've known about this program for a long time. You can't do the hardcovers because they can turn them into weapons.
You can turn anything into a weapon, though. So.
You can turn anything into a weapon, but some things are easier than others. So
all you need is a paperback, some urine, and a little time, and you can make that into a shiv. Don't ask me how.
Interesting.
I know. Yeah.
How many years did you do in the pen?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think this is a great program. I'm one of those people that I am an advocate for shifting away from a punitive prison system to a rehabilitation system. That's my philosophy, and I've seen that in other nations around the world. They do that approach where, in some cases, like these are prisoners who aren't even in cells. They literally have just a curfew, and they have to show up at this room every day at this time. And that's where they stay, but they can go to their day job or whatever. But I think books and things like that can help like improve the way someone thinks are vital to this process. And
yes,
I might have to hand in my conservative card now that I've said that I don't believe in punitive prisons. But anyway, I think it's a good program, JD.
Did you watch that documentary? On Netflix, there's one right now called Unlocked, and I think it's in Arkansas, and the sheriff just unlocked all the cell doors. They were on 23 and 1, 23 locked up and 1 out, and he unlocked all the doors for 6 weeks and said, if we treat you like responsible adults, you'll behave like a responsible adults. And for the most part, they did. I know like countries like Finland, and they keep the cells unlocked, so it's an interesting documentary.
Well, and when you look at, they've done so many studies that show time and time again that, we traumatize and we go after largely getting them young. And then we just create this system that continues to traumatize them. And, we don't really give them the tools or resources at all to help undo that trauma so that they can overcome the behaviors that got them in trouble in the first place. And then you start looking at how many prisons have become privatized and that whole process, and it gets very uncomfortable and terrifying. And yeah, the justice system is a punishment system. It is not necessarily about justice or change, which is very, very sad because it should be. But
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. And on that note, JD, who is up this week?
This week we've got Sarina Bowen, and she's got more than 30 novels behind her, primarily known as a best-selling and award-winning author of spicy hot romance. But she sidestepped a little bit with her latest novel. It's called The 5-Year Lie, and it's a thriller. So here she is, Sarina Bowen.
I want to talk about your new book, The 5-Year Lie, in a little bit. Do you know what number that is? You must have written over 30 books by now, at least.
Yeah, I stopped keeping a very accurate track because it's kind of like asking a woman her age at this point.
There you go, right? So you've written a lot. Do you remember your first book? How did you start writing? We go all the way back.
Yeah, I have always been interested in the novel as a format. That is my main interest. I like the linearity of it. I like everything about the way novels function. And so I started writing them in high school, and I couldn't even tell you the titles. And even my first full-length book as an adult was not published. You know how it goes.
Yeah.
And it just took me a while just to figure out that, first of all, that genre fiction was really interesting to me, and that I liked the analysis of genre fiction.
Okay, awesome. And you were working another job at the time of your debut. Were you on Wall Street? Is that correct?
I did work on Wall Street for a long time, and I actually didn't finish a book until after I left Wall Street.
Okay.
So I left, I had little kids, and suddenly I was taking one of them to preschool across town, and then I suddenly had some time, and that's when I finally, finished my first full-length novel. I know there are people who write books at home with small children. Hats off to those people. I was not one of them.
Yeah, I remember that's kind of how I started too, after my son was born, and it was great until he was about 6 months old. And then I'm like, I don't know how people do this, because now he moves and he's loud and he's everywhere.
Yeah.
So, with your debut, how did you go about finding an agent? Do you remember back then how that happened?
Yeah, so I have had several agents, to be honest. My agent now, Molly Glick, and I first met a really long time ago, and she is just wonderful and very professional. But the other people that I had were too, as well. It's just that I moved around a bit in terms of what I was working on. And so at one point, I wasn't working with Molly because she had left one shop to go somewhere else. And anyway, it was really great when she and I would keep in touch, and she'd say, someday we're going to click on another project. And then she said, I think you should try this suspense idea you've been talking about for a long time. And, I was ready. So we worked together on The 5-Year Lie. And it was our first project together in years. And it was so much fun to be working with her again.
Yeah, I want to talk about that genre switch. How did you first meet Molly? Do you remember?
Well, I've always had a very business-like approach to publishing, and I've always been interested in the business of publishing, to be fair. So even in college, I worked in an internship at Random House in the marketing department. I edited a book for St. Martin's Press. I have always loved the publishing side of things. So finding an agent is just something I went out about very carefully. And I thought that querytracker.net was the best tool for that. It's probably still going strong.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, it's just been a really long time since I needed to look at Query Tracker. And I read all the books. I took all the advice. I was careful with my query letter. I sent it out very according to everybody's standards, and it worked. I had my pick of a couple agents when I first worked with Molly, and she was so impressive that it wasn't really a hard decision.
I love that. So you cold queried and you followed the rules to get your first
Yeah,
agent.
I did. But please remember, this is quite a long time ago. And
Yeah.
just like everything in life, like applying for anything, it's all gotten nuttier since then. So,
Correct.
I'm really conscious of how lucky I've been in some ways, especially with regard to really doing well in romance, which is where I've been working for like the last 10 years. And just that timing sometimes matters a whole lot. So I'm not that kind of writer who's like, well, just do exactly what I did and it will work for you, because the world is more complicated than that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you said, you're very business minded about it. And I think, it's hard when you're emotionally invested in your art to also think that this is a business and this is a product, and that sometimes you have to make changes for what's right for your career. So that's awesome. The other thing I wanted to ask, so you switched genres, which I think is fascinating because romance is the best-selling genre. Pretty much hands down, everywhere you're looking, it sells number one, and probably thriller is number two. So you switched from romance to a domestic thriller. What made you decide to change genres?
Well, when you write many books, some things about the process get easier and some of them actually get harder, because I found myself starting to use up all of my sort of vectors of curiosity in terms of romance. And some of the story problems that I had done, I found coming up on them again. Like in my current series, I'd say, oh, this should happen now. I've kind of done that before. And I really didn't want to feel that way about my books, that I had maybe done that before. That wasn't a fun, exploring place to be. So the wonderful thing about suspense is that you're making the reader a different promise. So in romance, you're making one promise that the ending will resolve with a romantic conclusion that is satisfying. And in suspense, you're making just a different promise, which is that the reader will know what happened.
Yeah.
And I wanted different problems to solve because I was getting a little hung up on what have I already done and why is this new for me?
Yeah, I can see that. And romance is probably one of the genres that is more trope driven. Like the readers like what they like and they come for what they expect. So I can see how you can maybe get a little bit burnt out on doing the same thing over and over.
Well, I also feel that suspense is very trope driven. I just haven't
It is. Yeah.
I haven't played with those tropes before. Like I just haven't been in those situations. And so they feel fresh to me. And that's what really counts. Like you don't need your book to be original to the world, because please, like, how are we going to do that? But you need it to feel fresh enough to yourself that, the pace of discovery and those aha moments, they ring loudly so that you can guide yourself into the best possible outcome for that book. And that's what works so well.
Yeah. And I think it might have been Vonnegut that said there are 6 stories that we just tell over and over. And I think sometimes those constraints also give us creativity because you know what it needs to look like, and then you can play kind of in the middle with that. Do you find that's the case? Do you find
definitely.
Yeah.
Structure is absolutely freedom. And the fun fact is that I have become more interested in romance since leaving it. Like I never really left it, to be fair, but now romance feels refreshed to me because I had to spend time solving other problems. So, for example, in suspense, just absolutely anything can go wrong. And you're also tasked with matching wits with the reader at every turn. So it's a much more psychological exercise to me. And as I read deeply into suspense, sometimes I have trouble connecting with the characters because they don't have as much empathy with the reader. And realizing this and developing my taste in suspense has made me appreciate romance even more for what it what it accomplishes, how much empathy is built, and how really hard it is to convince your romance reader that everything is in peril, even when you've promised that it will end well. So that's a really difficult rope to walk, where you have to find a storyline in the romance that seems impossible and then deliver it. Whereas in suspense, you have promised nothing in terms of how people come out in the end. And some things about it are just easier. Like in suspense, you can kill anyone you want to.
That's true. So, yeah, with the 5-Year Lie, I mean, it does have a nice romantic thread. So I think I was like, yeah, I can see the crossover. A romance reader would also enjoy this, right? Because you're still having that thread and hitting those notes, even though it's secondary to the thriller plot. So I thought that was
well, thank
great.
you.
Yeah.
I worked really hard at that, actually, because I knew I wanted different problems, but I didn't want to burn my romance audience in delivering them. Like, I wasn't going to hand over, a slasher, horror. I wanted people to feel comfortable following me to this new book. I didn't know for sure if they would. So far, the uptake has been great. Actually, I've been really surprised how ready my romance readers are to try this book. It's amazing.
Yeah.
But I didn't know. It felt like walking into the void. Anything could happen here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you should always do the thing that scares you. Okay. And speaking of things that scared me, in the 5-Year Lie, I have to ask, do you have a Ring doorbell?
I do not have a doorbell camera. I don't even have a doorbell, but that was kind of a bad plan on my part. I am not a fan of cameras everywhere.
Yeah.
We joke, like, I'm old enough to have grown up before cameras were ubiquitous. And sometimes my husband and I will joke, like, aren't you glad that people didn't video our entire teenage years? Like, that would stink, right? Ha ha ha.
100%.
Well, the truth is, it's not funny to me anymore.
No.
I'm really worried about the ubiquity of video. And when I started reading this book, I started looking very hard at the research for what the worst thing that can happen if you have a doorbell camera. And there were lots of examples of bad things that happened and people whose privacy was violated. And I just didn't have any problem coming up with some terrible ideas about what video and everyone's lives could accomplish. And so obviously that becomes a thread in the book. It's not part of the flap copy, by the way. Like, that whole part of the book is not revealed to the reader going in, but it became a really fun question for me. How bad was this going to be, and where were we going to go with it?
Yeah. I don't have a doorbell camera either, or an Alexa, and smart houses terrify me. My phone terrifies me, but I need that. So I still have that. But yeah, I thought it was a really interesting thread. Did that idea just kind of strike you out of nowhere, or how did that come about that you were going to integrate that?
Well, so as you write on into your career, you have to kind of pay attention to what story questions always get you. And I started making a list of what articles I click on no matter what. And for example, I read Wired magazine cover to cover every month because I just love that kind of thing. Like, if there's a hacker breaking into something, and that, I just want to read that article immediately. So that's just one of my id things. Like, if you've ever heard a talk by Jennifer Lynn Barnes and how she talks about your id list, like, what are those things you just love to think about all the time? Like, I will read any article about a dog who made it 800 miles home to find his family. I will read any article about hackers or art theft, or there's just this weird collection of things that fascinate me, and this kind of privacy violation is just one of my things. Like, I will read that story first every time, and that's how those things end up in my books.
Yeah, I think there are so many of us that find that terrifying, and I certainly found that terrifying. So yeah, I'd love to talk a little bit more about craft. And in terms of your structure, I thought was really clever. And I've noticed this in other books, and I just love it. So I just kind of wanted to put it out there for our listeners that your book open and closes with the same sort of visual image. And I'm not going to spoil it, but it starts at a daycare with the protagonist's son, and it ends at the daycare. But it's a very different vibe and a very different result. Do you think about that kind of closing that loop or that beginning and ending structure in terms of visuals? And I'd love to hear about that.
Well, obviously, I was very conscious of the 1 year later sort of hitting those notes, how, everything was the same, but yet it was so completely different. That was really fun. It's always fun when you can bookend something like that. But I didn't know when I started writing the book that would work that way.
Yeah.
I tend to find my themes as I go, but I also work at finding them. So you're writing along and you're writing along and you're writing along and you figure out how many. One time I wrote a book and I didn't realize until after the first draft that there were a lot of lost sheep imagery in the book. And I thought, okay, wait, that's a theme. I need to pay attention so I can make sure I give it its due. And there's this particular other mom in the book that's really irritating.
She is irritating.
And by the time I got to the end and I let that woman deliver her last line of irritation, I was like, oh yeah, that's perfect. We've got to, that's going to be a moment. I need to make sure I land on that moment and pause for a second. Because, that's one of the things, if you read somebody who is new at writing, if they rush through a moment that matters,
Yeah.
So I just do my best to like find those things that people are going to notice and pause a second, like let that moment breathe before we move on.
Yeah. And now that you say that, I noticed that also with the watermelons. She had so many other stressful things going on that were actually stressful. But I was so stressed out by something so mundane through the whole book. Is she going to remember to get these watermelons?
Right.
And is that like sort of the similar type of technique you use? Just something that's maybe could just be mundane if you rush through it, but you really paused on it. And I really felt the stress of that, especially being a mother. You have all these other pressures on you, but then you got to do something for your kid that's maybe mundane, like maybe make sure they have a tie-dye shirt for tie-dye day or whatever. And I just felt that stress throughout the whole book.
Yeah, well, I'm certain when I wrote it in the beginning where she signs up to bring the watermelon to the picnic, I wasn't thinking about it. But, I've been a mom for long enough to know that those mundane things can really cause drama in your life. So I really, really enjoyed following that thread through the book. And in the end, when she's rushing through the grocery store and her life is like in flames around her pretty much, but she's got 10 watermelons in the cart and some guy says, hey, nice melons. And she just blows right by him. I have been that person with 10 watermelons in their cart at Hannaford. And, it's funny, the little things from your own life that end up in the book. And then people are like, where do you get these crazy ideas? And I'm like, well, all that crazy stuff is, from the newspaper, but those watermelons, that happened to me.
Right. Yeah. And I thought that was just such a smart technique. So I would encourage writers to find that and pause, especially as a mom. I'm like, your kid tells you at 9:00 at night, by the way, I need a tie-dye shirt tomorrow. And you're like,
right.
Okay. And I have a million other things going on. And now I'm rushing out to the dollar store to make tie-dye or whatever. So I just thought that was a beautiful technique. I also noticed you used what might be considered misdirection. I don't know if that's the right word, but the mean guy is the good guy and the nice guy is the bad guy. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh, well, it's hard to talk about that in a way that's not spoilery, but
maybe in general, not in terms of the book.
I really had to concentrate on misdirection in this book, which is, if you think about it, not a thing I've had to concentrate on that much in my fairly long career writing novels now. So yeah, I had to learn red herrings. And one of my readers for this book, she saved the book many times. Her name is Rosie Genova. And she writes cozy mysteries, and they're set in a beach town in New Jersey. And she saved this book many times by helping me really see those places where the pendulum swings in the reader's mind. And she put that image of the pendulum swinging in my head so that I was able to be the director and not just stumble through, the revelations that were happening. So thank you, Rosie. And then I was able to take that idea of the swinging pendulum to my new book, which I just finished and turned into Harper, and we're doing edits now.
Awesome.
Yeah, and so it was a 2-year process between when Molly and I sold this book on proposal, which is a thing that I thought was never going to work. And then it did. And then I was given, let's say, 10 months to write it, or 9 months or something like that. And then another year of turning it into publication. They gave me a nice long window because, proposal, it's not like they had a manuscript that they were sure about. And then so I used that time to read fairly deeply into suspense as a market, and I learned a lot. And the funny thing is, sometimes the more you study something, the less you feel you know about it. And I got kind of confused about where I fit into suspense when I was reading all these domestic suspense that are really dark and grim and you don't know who to root for. And I don't think I'm capable of writing that book. I really need my fiction to tell me who to care about, pretty much right from the get-go. I guess that makes me a softie, not exactly a simpleton, but I want to know who I'm supposed to care about so that I know whether it's worth my time to pay attention to these people. And I started kind of categorizing suspense into the books that are just grim and you don't know who to root for, and maybe they have some monster twist in them, or the ones that I know who I'm supposed to root for. Like, for example, Harlan Coben is an author I enjoy very much and always have. And you always know who the hero is in Harlan Coben novel, like right from the first page. And then there are other, there are a lot of female-driven suspense novels that don't do that, though. And so I had a moment of real pause over the last year where I was thinking about, well, okay, is it all right that mine does? Do I not fit here? And so you can imagine that when I went in to do book 2, I had bigger questions in my head instead of smaller ones, and I had to find a story structure that worked for me, but was more aware of what suspense readers were going for in that space.
Nice. So you're doing book 2 in this series, so there's going to be a follow-up to 5 years?
It's not in the same series, actually.
Is it a standalone?
It's a standalone. It does take place in Portland, Maine again, because I thought I would keep one thing the same, and plus Portland, Maine is really great. I go there often, like 2, 3, 4 times a year. So it was nice to have that. Plus the idea I had for my second book wanted to be in a city as well. It worked better in a city. So I thought, well, we'll just keep that one element the same. And there is also a little bit of a tech angle on my second book as well. It's a different tech angle, but you will recognize my little id list item when I tell you that the book 2 setup is a woman who's 40-ish, and she has a teenage daughter that she had really young, and she's a single mom, and she has just been dating for the first time in 15 years, pretty much. She was dating a man. She thought things were going great. He just dumped her a few nights ago unceremoniously by text, and she is so mad and so hung up on what the hell happened. I thought I understood what was happening here, and I didn't. That she uses the Friend Finder app is my fictionalized version, and she follows him around Portland, and he is out on the town, and she is mad. And then the last straw is that he goes and he parks his car in their spot to watch the sun go down.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, I can't believe it. It's 4 nights later and he's sitting in our spot, and who's in that car and what happened to my life. So she leashes up the dog and goes for a walk to find him, and he's dead.
Oh boy.
And so he's dead, and it's a big deal mystery. And she has just left a digital trail of stalking him.
Fantastic. That sounds great. Those Find My Phone, follow people apps, those scare me too. Everything scares me. I'm glad that I found a kindred paranoid soul about technology. That
Well,
sounds
of course,
fabulous.
the reason that I have this app on the brain, though, is because I use this app. I looked today at it because one of my college age children is on a trip to California, and I wanted to see that he got there. So my discomfort with that is honestly born. But that's another little way that the second book overlaps the first book without actually overlapping it. So
yeah, so I know staying in the same area without being in the series. So that's great. So are you going to stick with thrillers for a while? Is that the plan?
Well, I am still writing both.
Yeah.
I am working on a romance right now. It's a long time between selling a book on proposal and having that book published. So I had, some downtime, and I'm also aware that my readers are expecting me to finish certain series. So, I've been working on that.
Yeah, I'm fascinated. We're almost out of time, but I do want to ask, so you sold a book on proposal, a fiction book in a genre you hadn't written before. So was that difficult? I could see you're known for romance and you're now on proposal for a thriller. Was that a difficult process, or was it easier than you expected, or how did that work?
Well, I didn't know if it would work.
Yeah.
Because I am not an agent who is out there selling things all the time. My agent was pretty sure it would work.
Mm-hmm.
What I went with, though, was a big fat hook. Like, the hook for The 5-Year Lie is pretty hooky.
Yeah.
A woman on an ordinary Monday gets a text message from a dead man.
Yeah.
And he's been gone for 5 years, and he's the father of her child, and he never met that child, and it's a big deal. So that hook definitely helped. And the other thing is that I also have this resume where I've hit the USA Today bestseller list 24 times, and I've hit the Wall Street Journal list, and just the ability to finish novels and then get them in front of readers and sell a couple million books is, it definitely helped. So those two things together, I suppose, was enough to sell this book. And the sample that I provided was 16,000 words. So that's pretty beefy.
Mm-hmm.
That's, 6 chapters, not 3. And also a complete synopsis that, says who did it, what the mystery was, all that stuff. And I actually find proposals are really difficult to write. I mean, you have to pretend that you know everything about the book when you don't, because you've missed that crucial discovery part of the book. So yeah, it was hard for me to write that proposal and get it where I wanted it, but then selling it, well, I didn't have to sell it, so that part was easy.
Yeah. So did you stick to that synopsis, or did it change while you're writing?
I bet if I read it right this second, it's so close that we might not even clock the little differences. I think I pretty much did. But you know how when you think you know what your book is about and then you get in there and you're stuck anyway?
Yeah.
There was plenty of that. Like, I knew where I was going, but when I thought I knew the path to get there, it turns out I was wrong, and that the order of revelations for what she was supposed to discover was not correct in my head. So that took a lot of running on the treadmill to figure that out. So
nice. And are you typically an outliner? Do you outline your books, or is that just something you did for this book?
I do like to know where I'm going. I have never thought of myself as a pantser, but there are various levels of being a plotter. And for example, I always thought I was a plotter, and then I did a collaboration with a wonderful author named Sarah Mayberry about 5 or 6 years ago, and she's a plotter. So I didn't understand that I wasn't really a plotter until I worked with Sarah Mayberry.
So you're kind of a hybrid. You get a loose roadmap
Yeah.
of where you're going. And very nice.
Yeah.
Excellent. And just as we're coming to a close, I'd like to ask if you have any advice for authors who maybe are looking to switch genres. What advice would you give them?
Well, I said that I took a very analytical approach. I have sometimes read a thriller and then outlined what I thought happened. And another thing I like to do is read halfway through the book and then close the book and then write in my reading journal what I think is going to happen so that I can compare later. And that kind of analysis is very helpful if you want to switch genres.
So I love talking to authors that switch genres because I always find this fascinating. And I'm just curious, what gets harder for you when you're writing so many books in the same genre?
I haven't, I mean, other than I do horror and thriller. I haven't really bounced around, at least under my own books. I mean, but as a ghostwriter, I worked on Westerns, I worked on romance, I've done sci-fi, I've kind of been all over the board. Um, we've talked about this, but it's as long as it's a good story, I don't really care. I think if you read enough of that particular genre, you grasp what it's about. I mean, she kind of touched on, some of the differences between romance, and thrillers, and, like romance stories are fairly straight up as far as the way it's told. You're not tricking anybody, from a reader standpoint, you're just kind of getting from A to Z. Thrillers, you're all over the board. So I can see where that would be a big adjustment. And frankly, going the other direction, I think if you're accustomed to writing thrillers and you have to switch to something that's more linear, like a romance novel, I think would be tough.
Yeah.
But I think every author should give it a try. You never know when you're going to find your place. I mean, Colleen Hoover right now is doing extremely well. And it's particularly because she's crossing over from romance and incorporating thriller elements now into her books while holding on to the stuff that worked for her on the romance side.
Yeah.
So you never know what's going to work.
That's the plot. It's like plot twist. This was a romance story, but now it's a thriller.
So I'm curious. Now you said you're doing it ghostwriting, but I don't know if you've done it since. Have you ever written a book in a different genre and then felt refreshed to go back to your current genre or the one that you write a lot in? Is it helpful?
I never really thought about it that way. It's just, I just kind of look at the structure of other books in that genre and just kind of go with it. Yeah, I mean, I could see somebody, like if you find one that you like, I tend to read across the board, but I think if I only read thrillers and then somebody asked me to write something in romance, that would be tough. But, I tend to read it in romance. I tend to read all these other genres too. So I think, I don't really have a favorite, I guess, out of all of them. It's the easiest way to look at it.
I think the danger for me has been there is a book I'm currently working on that at one point, because like when I'm writing a thriller, I know that, sometimes I'll let things kind of run on their own, and I'll do something like this character suddenly got murdered, and you can't really. That's not a good idea in a romance. Like if the if the love interest suddenly got murdered and now it's a mystery or whatever, that can be jarring. So that's the only real thing that kind of hangs me up is I got to make sure I'm keeping my tropes straight while I'm writing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think once you know the rules too, because like every genre sort of has like certain expectations and rules. And like she said, there's sort of like the promise that you're making to the reader. I thought it was really interesting how she talked about how you're interacting with the reader as you write, which I think is a really interesting way to look at writing. Like it's not necessarily that you're delivering a product with them, but sort of you're building this in-text relationship with them based on what you're writing. And I really liked that perspective, and like that thought was like, oh yeah, you kind of are. And that's really an interesting way to, I guess, like wrap your head around, like it's not just a trope, it's that relationship you're building, which I thought was a really good way to look at it.
What I thought was interesting is that she said, in suspense, you've promised your reader nothing for the ending. Do you agree with that?
Well, you promise them a conclusion, right? I mean, like you're going to get some sort of satisfying ending. It just may not be a happily ever after for anybody.
Yeah, I think so.
I think that's what she meant by that, right? Like, because in a romance novel, obviously your leads are getting together and everybody rides off into the sunset.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, you still need to wrap everything up, and for the most part, in most thrillers. I mean, I love books, when they don't. The Cabin at the End of the World, is a great book, but like the ending is so ambiguous, you don't feel like you get that's like, you just don't know what the outcome is, and like I think that trips a lot of people up, and you see it in the reviews. Like reviewers just get angry, they turn that last page, and that's it. Like, you got to tell me. But I think most books are like that, right? You got to have a conclusion there, or people are gonna get angry with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I personally like endings. Like, it doesn't have to be completely tied up with a bow, but there has to be like some sense of like, I can at least envision a direction that the characters go in after the story ends.
Yeah.
Ambiguous is a lot harder for me.
Let me ask you a question then, because early on, my books were all in like trilogies early in my career, and I got all kinds of hate mail from people who would read like the first book in like the Citadel trilogy, and they were mad because it didn't conclude the whole overall story. And I since then I don't get much. Nobody says anything, but early on I got a lot of that. Do you need each book to be complete in and of itself?
Okay, so I have complicated feelings on this because I think I don't hate cliffhangers as an idea, but I do know that I have had books where it's like 2:00 in the morning and you're reading and you get to the end and it's a cliffhanger and you're like, oh my God, I need to know what happens next. And, so obviously you go to Amazon to see if I can just download the Kindle one real fast so that I can get started before the hardcover comes. And then you're like, oh, I can't get it for a year. And I'm absolutely devastated and can't sleep. But I also actually really enjoy that as part of the journey of reading. So I don't know. I know some people will refuse to read trilogies until it finishes. Like I've only been tricked once, by George R.R. Martin, because I thought obviously this book, was first published in the 90s. Of course, the series is going to be concluded when I started the mid 2000s, and it was not and still has not. And so like I haven't actually read Patrick Rothfuss's book.
Yeah.
Because I'm not convinced that the third book is ever going to come, and I just can't do that to myself.
Forget winter, disappointment is coming.
Right. So I don't know. I don't necessarily hate cliffhangers as a reader. I mean, particularly if, like when you're writing a debut, like when you query agents, it has to be a standalone with serious potential. So like if there's some sort of satisfying ending, I'm pretty okay with it. And even though it devastates me at 2:00 in the morning, I will typically deal with that and just read the book when it comes out.
I've been on both sides of that. I mean, we talked about this, I think it was even last week or the week before, like in my 4MK trilogy, the second book I ended with to be concluded. And then the third book basically picks up right where that one left off. People today are fine with it because all three of them are out there. But back in the day when it got published, they had to wait a year. I totally understand why people got aggravated, and you saw that in the reviews. I'm reading something right now. I don't even know if I can say this on the podcast. It's called the Mind Fucked series, something like that. Like it's got a little asterisk in there. And it's good, but like I think it's 4 or 5 books. They're all very short. They're like less than 200 pages each, and they end on a complete cliffhanger. Like it more or less wraps up the story for that particular book, but like you need to keep going if you want to know this whole story. But the full series is out there, So from an indie standpoint, I think you can get away with that.
Yeah.
You can chop up, what might be a long book, $200,000 or 200,000 word book into 4 or 5 different ones. Release them, a week apart, a month apart, or whatever.
Yeah.
And then just get them out there, and I think people will devour them, knowing that the ending is there. That's key.
Yeah, and I think that's a trick with a lot of indie, because that's an indie erotic romance, right?
And they tend to be shorter, 40,000
Yeah.
to 60,000 words. So yeah.
Yeah, and the readers kind of understand that they're gonna end on a cliffhanger and you're gonna kinda have to wait, but because they're indie, the wait is not as long, it's not a year,
Yeah.
so it's
See,
definitely shorter.
I'm waiting to die so I can ask Sue Grafton what Z was going to be.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I'll tell you when we hang up.
All right.
We're off the not recording. I've got an interesting
fun.
conversation
Yeah.
about that.
On that note, JD, who is up next week?
Next week, we've got Kimbo York coming on. She's known primarily for romance and fantasy novels, but she's written a nonfiction book called Become an Unstoppable Storyteller, How to Craft Compelling Serials. So this should be interesting. We haven't really talked about serials a lot on here. Kimbo York.
Oh, yeah. It's going to be great. I love talking about serials. If you'd like to be notified as soon as new episodes publish, make sure you go to writersincpodcast.com and sign up now. We'll see you next episode and have a great week of writing.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Writers Inc. Access the show notes and leave a comment at writersincpodcast.com.